Hello and welcome to Art Block, the show where we talk about art and how it's made. I'm your host Spirit, and today on the chopping block is 10 life hacks for artists. Let's get into it. Almost everyone has gotten just the right idea for a piece at just the wrong time. For many artists, it's right before they're about to go to sleep, or occasionally they might even wake up in the middle of the night and get a great idea. This life hack is for those who want to get those awesome ideas out before they go to sleep. First step is to find a sketchbook that's relatively small, no bigger than 11 by 14 inches. I would personally recommend a multimedia or drawing sketchbook that's good for sketching and coming up with thumbnails. Next, you're going to want to take a pencil or a pen, preferably mechanical, and tie a piece of yarn or twine to the clip of the pencil. I would recommend giving yourself at least 12 inches of yarn so you have enough wiggle room when you're using the sketchbook. Lastly, you're going to want to attach the yarn to one of the rings of the sketchbook. Now you have a sketchbook with its own designated pencil that you can keep by your side. This is also great to take with you on the road. If you have a purse or a backpack, you can stick it in one of the pockets along with the pencil. Life hack number 2 is for those who use Copic markers but don't have a rack for holding them. The first thing you're going to need is a shoebox or other similarly sized box made of cardboard. Next, turn the box so the bottom is facing upward and mark spots where you're going to put the Copic markers. The markers I own are about 3/4 of an inch wide, so I've marked the letter X with just a little bit of extra space in between. Next, use something sharp like scissors and poke an X at each point where you've marked, and then carefully stick your markers into the place. If you've done it correctly, they should stand up fairly well. Just be careful that when you're taking the markers out, some of the markers have caps on both sides, so you'll need to be careful that you don't lose the caps when you pull the marker out. This is a problem that I frequently had when using acrylic paint. I'll have a palette that has perfectly usable paint, but at the same time I'm either done or I've run out of time to work. This is a relatively easy life hack. All you need is a piece of Tupperware and a washcloth. When you're done with your paints, take your palette and any other thing that you want to maintain usability and place it in the Tupperware. Next, take a washcloth and get it damp. Be sure to wring the washcloth out so that it's no longer dripping. Fold it up and set it inside the Tupperware with your paints. If you're just leaving for a couple of hours, you can also take a damp paper towel and place it on top of your palette before placing it in the Tupperware so to keep the paint wet when you come back. As a quick disclaimer, do be careful when storing your paints for a long time. If you're not constantly coming back and cleaning the Tupperware, there is a chance that you could get mold or mildew, more specifically in the washcloth. My recommendation is to check the paint at least every other week and change out the washcloth so that it's not building up mold. Especially for traditional artists, portfolios seem to get filled up faster and faster. Whether you're in a pinch or simply unable to afford a portfolio, this trick is definitely a great way to store artwork more easily. You're going to want to take 2 large pieces of paper. In this case I used 2 pieces of 16 by 20 paper, but you can also take paper from a roll and fold it to achieve the same effect. Line up your 2 pages and staple it so that the 3 sides of the portfolio are shut. Next, you're going to want to punch 2 holes in the open side of the paper. This will leave 4 holes in total. After you punch the 2 holes, you're going to want to trim 2 pieces of yarn to be at least 8 inches long. Next, take the string and feed the yarn through the 2 holes. Make sure that each piece of string has their own piece of paper so that you don't have the 2 sides intersecting. Once you feed the yarn through the holes, tie the ends of the yarn together. These 2 pieces of yarn will act as your handle. This is a great emergency portfolio, however, it's not as immune to the elements as a more durable portfolio would normally be. Whether you're traveling or just have limited space, the Emergency Artist Box is essentially a first aid kit for artists. You'll need either a small pencil case, or in this case I've grabbed an old candy box to use since it has a convenient hinge. In an Emergency Artist Box, I like to include at least 2 pencils, an eraser, 2 Sharpies, and a fine liner. Some things you can also take with you are tape, a notepad, a paintbrush, and even a pair of scissors if you can get them to fit in there. This supply kit is especially good if you're traveling on a plane and you need to draw without constraining yourself to one medium. If you're ever in a bit of a rush and need to clean up all the small stuff lying around your desk, this is a fast and easy way to get all those little goodies off of your desk and at least confined to a smaller area. The first thing you're going to need to get is a winter's hat, similar to the one seen here, and a hair tie or a rubber band. Next, load up the bag with whatever is on your desk into the hat. When you picked everything off your desk or have no more room in the hat, pinch the top of the hat together and wrap the hair tie around the top. Another thing you can try if you're using colored pencils is a normal sock. Simply stick the pencils into the sock and tie up the sock using the hair tie. Another way to take this a step further is to use binder clips to hook your supplies onto the wall. Simply clip a binder clip to the sock or the top of the hat, and then using a wall hook, hook the clip onto the wall. Now you have a quick way to store your items. Getting officially made watercolor can be expensive. However, if you have some acrylic or tempera paint, there's an easy way to make some homemade watercolors. First step is to take either a muffin tin or a cookie sheet and set it out on a flat surface. Next, you're going to want to get some cupcake cups and then set them in the pan, preferably metal or something that won't disintegrate when it comes in contact with water. Take your tube or bottle of paint and pour in about 1/4 inch of paint into the cupcake cup and set it out to dry. Alternatively, I've seen people take a mini muffin pan and put the paint directly in the little holes. However, just be aware that you probably won't be able to use the muffin tin afterwards. A faster way to dry the paint is to put it in the oven at approximately 200 degrees. However, do be careful as some paints can be flammable when exposed to heat. Another alternative is to use soda bottle caps, though I would be careful with putting those in the oven unless you're really sure that they won't melt. When doing this project, I've found that tempera paint tends to have a nicer texture when it comes to using it as a watercolor. If you do decide to use the oven to speed up the drying process, be sure to have an adult with you if you are young, or be extremely careful when it comes to putting and taking the paint out of the oven. Whenever you're working with art supplies, there's always that risk of getting paint on that one shirt or smudging charcoal all over your sleeves. While you could go all out and buy a smock, there's a much easier way to save your clothes. Trick number 1 is to simply collect some of your older clothes and use them as cover-ups when you're working with paints or other messy mediums. However, if it's a cold day and you're feeling rather chilly, I like to put on an old fleece nightgown over my clothes. It's comfy and I don't have to worry about destroying my nicer clothes in the process. If you're familiar with animating on paper, you may have seen something called a pegboard to help keep your pages straight when you're animating. If you don't have a pegboard or the hole punch to match it, this trick is relatively simple and is great for those dipping their toes into animation. The first thing you're going to want to seek out is a binder. Preferably you'll want to have 3/4 inch or less size ring, but it doesn't really matter in the long run. Next, trim the side that isn't attached to the rings as well as the spine of the binder off with your scissors. If your binder has the rings mounted on a spine, just cut the front cover off and leave the back side. Also note that this one is fairly tricky, as you can see I was struggling to cut through the binder, so if you're young or don't have very strong hands, then I would suggest getting some help with this one. I personally have a light pad instead of a light box, so I like to tuck the other side of the binder underneath the light pad to keep it fixed. Otherwise, you might want to fix it with tape or something when you're working with a light box or a window. Also keep in mind that if you decide to keep the tab, you might have to turn the rings the other way so the light isn't being blocked by the other side of the binder, though this can be easily fixed if you trim it off. In the description, I've included a link to some sample paper that I've made so that you can print it out and use it for your binder. This includes a working area that fits a 16:9 aspect ratio, so you won't have to worry about correcting your aspect ratio when it comes to scanning it in. When working with paints, one thing you'll need is a palette to keep track of your paints. While you can't go to the store and buy a palette, this is an easy alternative that you can do at home. The first thing you're going to need is a tin or plastic plate. Now, I personally prefer to use a tin with a lid so that I can put my paints away without them drying out. However, if you're planning on cleaning your palette every time, then any plastic or metal surface works just fine. The next thing you're going to want to do is get some washed bottle caps as well as a hot glue gun. Taking the hot glue gun, you're going to want to put just enough hot glue on the cap and press it down. This is actually a great way to take paints with you on the go, since the lid will not only keep the paints wet, but you can also stick brushes and other items into the box. You can also let the paint dry in the caps and have your own on-the-go watercolors if you really feel like it. And that's about it for today's episode of Art Block. Do you have any artist life hacks? Drop them in the comments below. If you liked what you saw and you want to see more, make sure to subscribe and share this video around. It supports me and is practically free. Also be sure to check me out on Twitter and DeviantArt, where I post artwork and hang out with you guys outside of the show. Want to help me out behind the scenes? Check me out on Patreon, where you can get access to resources, art tips, and even sneak peeks to some of the projects I'm working on in the background. Thank you all for watching. I'm Spirit, and I'll see you next time.